what you're looking at the moment is a situation in which the Ukrainians' manpower shortage is becoming absolutely critical. The Western press is full of encouraging stories about how the Russian economy is weakening and all the rest. But nonetheless, on the battlefield, the reality is that the Russians are making some progress and making faster progress than they have in the past.
So the UK is reportedly ready to send troops to defend Ukraine's skies and seas, but will stop short of deploying British armed forces to the front line with Russia. Talks at the Pentagon in Washington are currently ongoing, with military chiefs from 30 countries, including Sir Tony Radakin, the UK's chief of the defence staff, discussing plans for Ukraine's security guarantees. Let's speak to Major General Jonathan Shaw, a retired British Army officer and former Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff. He joins us now. Jonathan, good evening to you.
Hi.
Look, there have been plans on the table to deploy as many as 30,000 European troops to Ukraine. Some European countries, I know, oppose this. I wonder what you think of that figure, first of all. Is that in any way viable when we look at some of the nations discussing this?
30,000, I suspect, would be a drop in the ocean if you're really talking about enforcing any kind of peace deal. And for that reason, this has more to do with politics than I think it has to do with actually a defence reaction to what's going on.
But if those politics are to do with, trying to end the war between Russia and Ukraine and provide Ukraine with enough security guarantees that they feel confident about any peace deal on the table, surely that's a worthwhile plan.
Well, yes, but the devil there is in the detail, because what you're implying is that sending 30,000 people is in some sort of peacekeeping role will somehow tilt the military balance and provide and magically produce some security guarantee. I think this is most unlikely, and I think is a delusion, frankly. If you look at it. If you look at it from the Russian point of view, what did you just announce? Some air cover to do what? Sea cover to do what? And land forces that won't be near the front line, i.e. they won't get involved in the fighting. That doesn't sound like much of a deterrence force to me. And if I was the Russians, I would keep with our current position and just keep grinding on the war.
Right, so this does not sound hopeful from your view. What do we need to see over there? There are of course, huge constraints. I mean, certainly when we look at the UK's ability to provide men and women military force in numbers, there are budgetary constraints as well. There's a lot of nervousness from other countries. Italy, Germany specifically are worried and have signalled their concern about sending troops anywhere near to Ukraine. What should this look like in order for it to do the job it's intended to do, in your view?
Well, we face a huge problem in that there's no set up command structure for this. There's no agreement about who would take part. This coalition of the willing, they can take months, years to come together. And I'm not sure we're there yet at all. We're making things up as we go along, which I suspect is inevitable. But nonetheless, it makes it extremely difficult to come up with a credible and workable solution. And believe me, the Russians have been watching us for a long time, and they will be able to analyze gaps in our planning, weaknesses in our logic, weaknesses in the different legal conditions that different forces will go there under, because that's exactly what happened in the Balkans, and I'd be very surprised if it doesn't happen here. So there are really difficult problems here. So it's good to see that the nations of Europe are really getting together and dealing with the detail. But that detail needs to be very precise, needs to be very clear, and it needs to be credible.
So let's just look in further detail at those considerations that need to be made, and we can use the Balkans as an example. Just try and illustrate that for us as we're trying to get our heads around, I suppose at its most basic level, we imagine a group of European nations joining together, everyone with the same approach and the same outlook, merrily stomping off to Ukraine and providing enough of a deterrent so that Russia halts what they're doing right now and leaves the immediate vicinity and beyond forever. That is the rose-tinted view of what we're looking for here. But what do we need to consider? What are these details we need to look at?
Well, the real question that the West has to answer is, are we there to support Ukraine winning the war, or are we there to help them directly win the war against Russia? Because the two are quite different. One involves a sort of training and logistics and support role, an intelligence provision role, and the other involves actually fighting. And if you're talking about what you're looking at the moment is a situation in which the Ukrainians' manpower shortage is becoming absolutely critical. The Western press is full of encouraging stories about how the Russian economy is weakening and all the rest. But nonetheless, on the battlefield, the reality is that the Russians are making some progress and making faster progress than they have in the past. And Ukrainian manpower is increasingly stretched. And I think the Russians are, if I was the Russians, I'd be spinning all this out as long as possible, which means that Europe and stuff, if we want to get involved, we have to really accelerate our planning, accelerate our organizational capability at the moment. And that's very difficult to do. That's incredibly difficult to do. It takes months and years. And so we're up against it.
I note that in both those options, you talk about Ukraine winning the war. Surely that is no longer an objective. Surely the objective is that Russia stops any further invasion of the territory there, and that Ukraine is safe rather than winning a war.
And here you get to the whole difficulty of whose war it is and who's defining the end state of such a war. The Russians, the Ukrainians, whose war primarily it is with the Russians, they, by act of constitution, Zelensky cannot give up land. So from his war aim, his maximalist war aim is to regain all the territory he's got. We may think that is unfeasible. We may think that is unrealistic and unachievable.
Do you think that is still Zelensky's aim?
Well, I think constitutionally he has to go to the country and get a vote to allow him to cede it. That is the sort of legal position he's got into. I think people are coming to a recognition that it's going to be very difficult and very long term. So that's why the Ukrainians are after a ceasefire that basically freezes the situation at the moment and then gives them hope in time, as they would say, to regain. But they're not in a position to legally hand over areas of their country. That's not what they want to do. So as far as the Russians are concerned, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, what we're looking at is the hope of a frozen conflict. And that, to my mind, is precisely why the Russians won't sign up to a ceasefire, because at the moment, the longer these negotiations go on without a ceasefire, the more territory Russia seizes. And so the worse the situation gets for Ukraine. So all in all, we have the gap between what success looks like for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, and for the Europeans, the coalition of the willing, the gap between those three seems to me irreconcilable. And I just hope that they come up with something that makes sense after a while.
We're yet to get there by all accounts. Major General Jonathan Shaw, retired British Army officer, former Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff. Thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.